how's it going, Big Dreamers? Your lady, Vitamin Katie, is here. I am so excited. I have my dear friend, Kara. She is the Director of Nutrition at Nutrisense, which is a continuous glucose monitoring system. We are about to get nerdy. We are about to have some fun. She's my friend from college at Purdue University. We were friends freshman year. And I am so beyond impressed with the research that she has done. I actually did some research before this interview. And according to the National Diabetes Statistic Report, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2020, 1 in 10 people in America have diabetes. And approximately 1 in 3 people have pre-diabetes. Not to mention, this is a really big risk factor for coronavirus and obviously a lot of other metabolic diseases. So I'm so beyond excited. And I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Kara, is what are some of the biggest things that you've learned from working at this place with Nutrisense?
Yeah. So much. I think a big thing you mentioned in the beginning is just the focus of preventative health. When we met freshman year, I think we clicked within 2 seconds of talking to each other because we both got this. It's like how important it is to address the root cause. And we both did spend some time in the traditional healthcare system, and guess what they do really poorly? Addressing the root cause of your problem. So they're there to put like a Band-Aid on your symptom. They're not there to address the root cause at all. And we're both doing our own thing now because we were like, screw that. That's not how you actually make a meaningful difference in somebody's life. So my approach has been to use technology and data to really get at that root cause. So using these continuous glucose monitors specifically in non-diabetics so they don't become a diabetic. You're right, the rates of diabetes and prediabetes is so alarming, and that's the rates that we know of. Trust me, from seeing people's data, they think they're healthy, they haven't been to the doctor in 10 years, but they're a normal weight, they go to the gym, then you slap on some data for them and they're like, I'm not so healthy. So how many people out there are walking around with insulin resistance and we have no idea? And not only does insulin resistance drive diabetes, but it's the root cause of cardiovascular disease, of dementia, of chronic kidney disease, of hypertension, of all of these ailments that afflict so many people. And so what do we have to do is we have to address insulin resistance. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to see what's happening with your metabolism, your metabolic health. And one of the best ways to do that is with a CGM, which is why we use that, because it's one of the only technologies out there right now where you can see 24/7 what's happening inside of your body. I would love one day if we had a continuous insulin monitor or a continuous cortisol monitor, but that doesn't exist. So we're using the best we can with technology, and we pair everyone with a dietitian. So not only just data and technology, but you have a voice there of expertise and reason who can help you build the picture up. You know, we're not trying to be myopic about like glucose is everything and only everything that you ever should care about, but it's the best metric we have right now to address these real world problems. So I don't even know if I addressed your question you asked.
You did. You're saying like, yeah, something huge that you have. Well, I asked you like, what's something broad that you've learned, like a big takeaway? And you're like, look, people, this is so important for people to monitor is your blood sugar. And I love that this is your way of prevention because, and obviously I agree, it's so frustrating working in hospitals and having people, serve people soda and when they're trying to recover from like literally a kidney transplant and you're like, okay, I hate everyone. Yeah. I just want to actually take a step back though, because I relate so much to this healthy person who thinks they're super healthy and they actually have a metabolic insufficiency with their blood sugars. And that's actually part of the reason why I do have a blood glucose monitor. And it's crazy how I know maybe you relate to this. I have a history of being underweight, not getting my menstrual cycle, losing my period, like this whole thing. And then in experiencing food freedom and being like, oh my God, let me just eat everything, let me whatever. I personally did struggle with higher blood sugars fasting. And I was like, wow, I am like the health freak. I want to be as healthy as possible. I want to also obviously eat enough and not be super restrictive and not be like in my head about all these things. And it's so nice to use this blood sugar example instead of tracking weight or instead of tracking these other things as far as your health. And I would just love to hear more about that. Like, as far as the variability from person to person too, it's crazy hearing you say that your friend, she did not respond to bananas the same way that you did. Like, everybody's body is so different. What could you tell us about that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's super important that you're monitoring it, that we're all monitoring it, and that we're making this seem important for the non-diabetic, because the only way you can catch things early and make changes early is to be monitoring it. The first step is awareness always. So you usually can't feel that these changes are happening, and then it's 10 years of sort of something going on there, and then it accumulates to maybe you see like pre-diabetes, and that's another 10 years until it develops into diabetes. So it takes a long time. So you have to be measuring really early to see what's happening. But based on the inter-individuality, it's huge. It's one of the big things that I learned, and I wasn't expecting to see such wide variances between like healthy whole foods. Everyone is going to have a big glucose spike to soda or candy. Like, that's not surprising, but everyone has really wildly different responses to whole foods too. And, you know, it turns out we're all unique. We're this unique compilation of genetics, epigenetics, our environment, even just air pollution affects your ability to metabolize these foods. So where you live matters, what your parents ate. So all of these things are going to impact how you respond to things, especially microbiome. We all have a different microbiome composition, and this is going to predict how we respond to different foods. So like, for example, I have several dietitians on my team, and we're all healthy. We're all relatively the same way, physically active, but we respond differently. It's not because one of us is insulin resistant or not. It's just the differences between us. So for example, I've tried just about like every fruit you can imagine in very controlled settings, and bananas are one of my lowest glucose response. I barely move from bananas at all. But my coworker, Carly, that's her biggest fruit response. And so it's just like, you would not know unless you're measuring. Some of the other things are like starchy vegetables, like sweet potatoes. I actually have a higher response to than regular potatoes. Wouldn't have known that. I have a higher response to quinoa than rice. So now I'm like, I mean, it's like you pay more to have quinoa instead of rice. And now I'm like, I'll keep the rice. Like, it's fine. I know I respond better to that. It's one of those things you just don't know unless you're measuring. So that's super interesting to see in the data. That's one of the things you can learn. So even if you're a healthy person, you're showing no signs of insulin resistance. You don't want to change your diet too much. Like, you're not going to suddenly jump from like vegan to carnivore. Like, that's fine, but you can like tweak these little things. And if it is a food you love, like let's say I spike really high to sweet potatoes, but I absolutely love them. Okay, then let's hack that a little bit. Let's biohack that response. So maybe I'm eating a little bit of protein and fat before I have that, because to help blunt that response. Or I only eat sweet potatoes after exercise when I'm super insulin sensitive. You could do some things to sort of hack that response and make it better. If it's a food you love, I'm not trying to take away a food that's nutrient dense that you love, but maybe we need to like play around with it a little bit. And if you skipped your workout that day, I'm not gonna eat sweet potatoes that day because I know I'll have a higher response. So we can play around with it, but you can't do those things unless you have the data and unless you know what's going on.
Yes. Oh, I love how this is truly about people's energy. I think that you have described really that down the road, this is going to be a huge problem for people who aren't aware of what's going on in their body. And I completely agree. Everybody, please get your blood tested, take control of your health as much as you can, and preventative measures. The thing is, there are a lot of people who are exhausted. There are a lot of people who don't understand why they have cravings all day long. And like, you think you're not feeling these things. Like, we think that oh, my cat just jumped in my lap. We think that we're healthy, quote unquote healthy, but most people, 1 in 3 people are pre-diabetic. You're probably feeling really lethargic. I love that it's so unique from person to person. Like, what's that? I see so many Instagrammers saying, if we all ate the same food and did the same workout, we would all still have different bodies. So keeping that in mind as we think about, okay, how does my body feel when I react to this food or when I eat this food? if I'm feeling really tired after I eat this, it's like, wait, this is a healthy food. Quinoa is supposed to be healthy. Like, why do I feel this way? And I get clients who are always complaining about that kind of a thing. They're like, huh? And I'm like, you are unique. Maybe quinoa isn't for you. Maybe sweet potatoes don't work for you, and that's okay. And people think that there's something wrong with them, when really it's like, okay, there's more to it. And it's going to be important for us to, instead of taking in so much information from the outside, to really know that our body's unique, get some kind of a continuous blood glucose monitor, and figure out what works best for your unique body. So I freaking love that.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things like our customers are always telling us is that having the data enhances their mind body connection, because you can start to quantify how you're feeling. But when you're just like feeling different things and you're not really sure where it's going or like what the pattern is, it's hard to piece that together. But when you have data reinforcing that, and not just from the CGM, also like, you know, wearables like heart rate monitor or HRV, like if you can start to piece real objective data from your body with subjective experiences, you can start to feel like, oh, when I feel like this, I know this is because my glucose is high. Like you can start to learn those skills independently. Like you don't have to wear a CGM the rest of your life. You can learn those skills and then be able to identify those feelings better because you've now been able to match it with data. And I think that's a huge benefit. And you're right, there's nothing wrong with you. We're all just different, and that's totally okay.
Yes. Oh, and I love the idea of a CGM because obviously as a personal trainer, as a dietitian, we would track weight, right? We would track people's weight. And this does lead to, there's actually research behind this, like having weight goals does cause anxiety around food. It causes body image issues. It causes a lot of stress around that number. It's unnecessary. When it comes to tracking your blood sugar, it removes anything around your self-worth. It's more so really truly about your long-term health and your energy and happiness long-term for longevity. So
right. Like it removes the aesthetics aspect, which can get really muddled in the bigger picture goal. How you look is not always representative of like what your metabolic health looks like or what you look like on the inside. And that's a hard truth to come to. And I get that. But I think it's important for people to realize, especially when you're still in a normal weight, but you have like 5 or 10 pounds you want to lose. That might be really hard to get rid of, and your body you might not ever be able to shed those last 5 pounds, and you're still in a normal body weight. We can focus instead on metrics that are more meaningful for health span, for like feeling good. So reshifting that focus is super important.
Yes. I love that. And that actually, I want to swing back around to what you were saying before about biohacking sweet potatoes that you love. So I definitely know, I've read research around, blueberries lowering the glucose spike when you add that to high carb foods. Also, I've read that resistant starch in beans can help with lowering the glucose spike of your next meal. What tips do you have around that and around, oh my God, I want to be able to feel free and eat ice cream and like live my life. What tips might you have around that?
Yeah, I think, okay, so with just like the glucose hack tips, we can start there and then we can talk about kind of like the bigger picture. So there's some really simple things that you can just incorporate, I think, into your normal life, and it doesn't feel restrictive or crazy. Some are like, you might not know unless you're measuring the data. Like I don't know my sweet potato thing unless I saw it on the data, and then I can incorporate that certain ways. But there are certain things that are general truths. So one thing is shifting most of your calories, most of your macronutrients earlier in the day. So everybody responds worse to food eaten late at night than eaten during daytime hours. So this is like the concept of chrononutrition. Like we want to match up our circadian rhythm with our external factors such as food. So all of our organ systems have peripheral clocks and they all work on the circadian rhythm. And our pancreas that secretes insulin is not meant to be secreting insulin at 2 a.m. when, you know, we're having ice cream. And so it's just shifting that to an earlier time can make a really meaningful difference. So just shifting dinner time from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. can actually make a really meaningful difference. So almost everyone does better with food earlier in the day, and especially carbohydrates earlier in the day. So that's like an easy thing. That's like a general rule of thumb. Another thing is just like movement. It doesn't mean that you have to go to the gym for 2 hours every single day, but it's making sure you're moving throughout the day. So for me, that's if I'm sitting in front of my computer working for an hour, I'm just going to do a quick 5-minute burst of something. So quick push-ups, quick walk around the block, like whatever it takes, that's just as important as working out or going to the gym. So movement, your muscles are a huge sink for glucose. So 80% of the circulating glucose in your body gets taken up by skeletal muscle. So that is a big driver of what your glucose levels look like, is how often you are stimulating your muscles. So just moving, just going on a walk after meals, simple things make huge differences. And along that line, including strength training. So I think a lot of women are obsessed with like being on the elliptical for 3 hours or running, and that's fine, but strength training is super important. So the more we build up that lean body mass, the more glycogen stores we have, which is where our glucose goes for storage space, the more our muscles can pick up glucose after we eat. So having that lean body mass is beneficial for many, many reasons, but it's also really beneficial for glucose metabolism. So those are a few hacks. Another one, which I've been experimenting with, I have a CGM on right now, I've been experimenting with recently in like a bunch of different foods, is just macronutrient timing at a meal. So like if I have some protein and some carbs, if I eat the protein first and then the carbs, I have a significantly lower glucose response. Same with fiber. So eating like non-starchy vegetables first and then my carbs, that helps blunt that glucose response. So that's like a super easy, sometimes, you know, the meal's mixed and you're not going to like pick it apart. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to like freak out about it. But if it's already separated, eating the protein or the fat or the fiber first can make a really meaningful difference. So that's just like a super easy thing you can do in everyday life. Another thing I think is just getting appropriate light exposure. So aligning that circadian rhythm again. So getting some sunlight early in the day and then trying to avoid those bright lights at night, the artificial lights, it can make a really meaningful difference. And then stress and sleep. This is important for anything we talk about health related, but it's also important for glucose control. I always talk about the 4 pillars of health, but also 4 pillars of glucose control as like food, which comes with what you eat and when you eat, exercise, stress, and sleep. And you take away any of those legs and the table falls over. They're all equally important. So if we're neglecting our mental health or we're neglecting our sleep, it doesn't matter how well you're eating or how much you're exercising, you're not going to be able to reach whatever health goal you have, because they all play such an important role. So just remembering the bigger picture of health and how it includes all of these factors, I think is super important.
Huge. Yeah. I feel like people don't realize that the littlest things, like getting up for 5 minutes and like lowering your stress and getting enough sleep in the dark, all of those things do add up. That was really, really great tips. I just have a couple of questions around that. I have people asking me like, oh, what about apple cider vinegar? Like, what about
yeah, that actually works. Yeah. The vinegar works. Again, this is a thing. I was just talking about this morning because it really works. Like if you drink some apple cider vinegar before a meal, you're going to see a significantly lower glucose response. Cool. But like I don't know how realistic it is. Like it almost like might feel like torture if you're like, every time I eat a sweet potato, I have to have apple cider vinegar first. Like it doesn't have to be this strict thing, but if you want to play around with it, it really does work in vast majority of people.
Whoa, cool. Okay, so we have these hacks now. So we know like there's a few things we can do. And of course, I do recommend everybody figuring out what foods are causing you a spike versus somebody else, so that you're not just like hacking every single carb that you eat, going crazy. What do you think around, you know that this food isn't good for you, and you did mention this a lot earlier. I just have clients who they want to experience true health and not feel like they're freaking out when they're going to eat a meal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the 80-20 rule is really appropriate here, where it's like 80% of the time I'm eating in line with what my physiology wants and what feels good. And then there's room to play. Like it's totally okay. Like I have bad meals, you know, here and there, and it's like I'm perfectly fine, and I'm not increasing my signs of insulin resistance just because I had a bad meal yesterday. Like I just promise you, your body is not this fragile system where you have one meal and one glucose spike and suddenly you've like lost all glucose control, or suddenly you're insulin resistant, or suddenly you're going to gain 10 pounds. Like, I promise you, it's not that fragile, especially if all those pillars are really tuned in. So if I have my stress under control, if I'm sleeping adequately, if I'm still moving throughout the day and making it to the gym consistently, there's plenty of room for flexibility. Like, I'm not going to die because I had a glucose spike. We always tell people, because people, you know, get very concerned when they see their numbers too high because they ate something that maybe wasn't great, but it's about repeated exposure. So in, you know, CGM data, we're looking at glucose values above a certain threshold, but also the shape of that postprandial response. But like, let's say you cross that threshold once, every once in a while, it's like no big deal. Your body has systems in place to take care of that. Like, it's okay. It's not this fragile system. But if we're doing that every single day, that's when we start to see accumulated damage. But the problems occur with repeated occurrence on a consistent basis. So that's why it's like, we don't want those repeated occurrences coming from foods we think are healthy and we like. So that's why I think you should have the knowledge. So you know, okay, these foods all do well, so that most of the time, like, I know it's fine and I have room to, you know, play with that. But if you're eating something you think is healthy most of the time, but it's actually causing damage, that could be a mismatch there of knowledge.
Yes, you just made so many people feel so much better hearing this badass dietitian say, I do eat meals. I know
Yeah, it's fine.
we had ice cream together when I came to visit. And
Yeah.
it's fine, people. It's crazy how hard it is to get this through people's heads that actually you can experience balance in this life. You can go on a date, have that ice cream, you can. And the majority of the time, you want to be feeling good. You want to be taking care of yourself, and you're excited about that, choosing it from an empowered place. Not like, oh, my life is so sad, I just can eat salad now, boo-hoo. You know, it's not, it doesn't have to be like that. We can really find ways to get creative and have fun creating meals that you're excited about and that are optimal for you with your glucose levels and experience. Yeah, I love that. 20% of the time, have that dessert and you're not going to die if you're most of the time taking care of yourself. I love that.
And to me, it's really empowering to have these decisions just feel really mindful. Like, I just moved to a new city. I just moved to Austin. And like last weekend, we went and got brunch. And like, I definitely did not order anything healthy on that menu. But it's like, I'm trying somewhere new. I'm making the decision intentionally that like, I don't care right now in this moment. And I'm choosing this food for like pleasure and for social interaction as opposed to nourishment, and that's okay. But it's a mindful decision, as opposed to maybe I'm out at a social gathering and they have a bunch of food out that is not good for you, but I also know it's not going to taste good. Like, I won't even really enjoy that much. And so it's like, I'm going to say no to that, and I'm not going to be pressured by people to eat it because I'm making the mindful decision that's not really worth it. And so I think that's empowering, is to feel like that's not really worth it. Just like going out for drinks, if it's like, it's not really worth it because I know it's going to take a hit on my sleep and I don't really care that much about like having a drink right now. So that's empowering, as opposed to like, yeah, I do want to have one. I'm having a nice dinner and it's a fancy cocktail and it's fine. So I think having that mindfulness behind your decisions is where it's really empowering.
So important. Exactly. Just, I appreciate you noting that your mental health and your pleasure and your happiness and joy of experiencing all that there is to experience in this life is just as important as you making sure that you're set up for success with your health. And I noticed that this is it differs from situation to situation. Like, obviously, if you're going to a wedding, like, please have a drink, like, enjoy yourself, have that piece of cake. But if you are somebody where your friends are going out every single night, and it's like this chronic thing where you're always having these meetings where they're bringing donuts and pizza, and it's a lot of every single day, that's when it becomes an issue, and we may need to dial it back. Yeah. So everybody listening, everybody watching, do be more aware of what you're choosing, and make sure it's coming from an empowered place that is optimal for a balanced, long-term, healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, the things that are going to work, the only like lifestyle plan, the only diet that's going to work is one that you feel like you can realistically stick to in the long term. So that's something that's important to keep in mind too. Like if it feels overly restrictive and you're not going to be able to stick to it, it's worse to do that cycling as opposed to finding something in the middle that's realistic.
Yes. Wow, thank you. That's so true. I know that we obviously our bodies do need some we need insulin. We need blood sugar to like function. So
Mhm.
what are your measures of optimal values? And when people have higher blood sugar levels, like I've had clients who they're like, oh no, my fasting blood sugar was high. I didn't want to eat until my blood sugar got lower. And I'm curious what your recommendations are as far as telling them to fast. Do you say like, okay, we're going to make sure, what are your recommendations if their sugars are a little bit high? And what are the optimal levels that you're looking for with your clients?
Yeah, so with glucose, we're kind of looking at three different metrics. The first is fasting glucose. So what your glucose looks like in a fasted state. I generally want to see that between 70 and 90. Traditionally below 100 is considered normal, but I like to see it 70 to 90 because once we're in between 90 and 100, there is some there's some increased risk at that stage. So that's where I like to see it as like an optimal level this is all for a non-diabetic.
Yes.
And then postprandial, so we're looking at both how high does your glucose go. Might be hard to catch on a glucose meter because you could totally miss it. Sometimes it happens within 5 minutes and then comes back down. So that's easier to see on a CGM, but that maximum value, we're trying to stay below 140 most of the time. Again, this is about repeated exposure. If you have a spike to 160, I promise you it's going to be okay. If you have a spike to 200, it's a little bit more of a red flag. So anywhere above like 180 from a large glucose load, it's starting to be a little bit of a question mark. So maybe there's something going on here. It might be some sign of insulin resistance. If you're hitting like 150 from very minor amounts of carbohydrates, like let's say you had 1 cup of berries and you went to 150, that's also a little bit of an over response, might be a little bit of a red flag. So it depends on the food. And then we want to see what that shape of that postprandial curve looks like. So within 2 to 3 hours of eating, we kind of want to see it coming back down to pre-meal values or at least below 120. Again, who in ADA would say less than 140 at that 2-hour mark. I'm going to hold it to like a higher threshold because I don't think that that's necessarily optimal values. I think those are metrics maybe if you already have diabetes where some pancreatic damage has been done. But if we're looking for optimal, I want to see it back down to kind of pre-meal values by that 3-hour mark. So a small area under the curve is signaling that yes, we ate carbs. Yes, our glucose went up. That's normal physiology, but it didn't go up too high. And then our body released insulin, and not too much insulin, but enough. And then it came back down. So basically our cells are listening to that signal of insulin coming back down. That's a signal that we are still insulin sensitive. If your glucose came up and it stays up for like 3 hours, then your cells aren't that insulin sensitive because your body is most likely pumping out insulin, but some reason glucose is still staying high. So it's about that shape of the curve. Yeah. So recommendations are going to be different depending on if I'm seeing signs of insulin resistance or not. If you have a higher fasting glucose level, but we're really not seeing any signs of insulin resistance, and again, insulin resistance is something that's hard to diagnose. There's no test where you go to the doctor and it's like an insulin resistance test. So we're going to want to look at these glucose metrics, but you also want to look at blood pressure and HDL, triglycerides. And if you can get a fasting insulin level, that's really helpful as well. Again, it doesn't tell us what's happening in a postprandial state for your insulin, but it tells us at least what's happening in a fasted state. And I like to see that between 3 and 8. So if you're not insulin resistant, you have a high fasting glucose, I'm usually looking at what did you eat the night before and how late did you eat it? Again, with that earlier time restricted eating window. So those are the two things I look at first. So maybe you ate really late at night, even though it was healthy, I promise you it's going to lead to a higher fasting glucose value the next day. The other two big things are you under a lot of stress and are you sleeping poorly? So both of those is going to stimulate cortisol, which is going to increase our endogenous glucose production. So it's going to stimulate the liver to create some more glucose. So higher fasting glucose values, especially in a non-diabetic, is almost always reflective of high stress or poor sleep. So those are two big areas that we could just drill into those if you don't have diabetes. Even if you do have diabetes, those factors still are appropriate. but we're going to see a higher fasting glucose values in those who are insulin resistant and are showing or do have diabetes. And for those, we might have some different interventions. It's difficult to get the fasting glucose down in a diabetic because you've already have pancreatic cell damage at that point. So it's going to take some serious work. And with that, I rely pretty heavily on fasting because we have to somehow teach the liver how to relearn how to regulate all of this. So in a fasted state, our liver is doing most of the work, right? It's stimulating, okay, how much glucose is in the system? Do I need to release glucagon to bring it back up? Is insulin suppressing it? What's going on? And we've lost that signal and those communications in a diabetic or insulin resistant state. So for that, I'm going to rely on fasting, and it looks different for everyone. We don't necessarily need to be doing long fast if you're perfectly healthy and not showing signs of insulin resistance. It's okay, but it's a really useful tool if we have some damage that needs to be kind of fixed. Yeah. That postprandial state, maybe we just need to tweak what it was you were eating. Maybe we just need to find foods that work better for you. Maybe we need to just eat it earlier in the day. But increasing insulin sensitivity, if we're seeing that long postprandial response, then exercise is the biggest one. We want to make those cells more sensitive to the effects of insulin. And doing that is movement, strength training, HIIT, cardio, any of them, they all increase insulin sensitivity. Do what you like, find the one you like and do it. It's fine. So for the postprandial response, it might be just tweaking the actual food, or it could be trying to improve insulin sensitivity.
So good. I have to ask 2 questions. I know we're running out of time here. That was really, really great. I am so curious because I've done a lot of research on sleep and optimizing your sleep. And I remember learning that having a complex carb later in the evening can actually help produce, feel good, calming hormones like serotonin, neurotransmitter, to help you wind down a little bit. And I personally just think I do sleep better when I have some kind of a carb with my later meal. What comments do you have around that? Is that a bad idea?
It's a good question. And this is something where I think it varies person to person. And I've seen some clash, and maybe I've read that research as well, but then I've also read research that conflicts that. So I think it might depend on the person. So for a lot of people, if they're going to bed with higher glucose levels, that's going to interrupt their sleep quality. So it tends to interrupt with the nervous system, and they're more on alert if their glucose values are higher, and they have a harder time getting into that deep sleep. But for many people, maybe they eat those complex carbohydrates and it doesn't cause the increase in glucose values. Maybe they're responding to that perfectly fine, and it actually does help with sleep. So I think it depends on how well you're tolerating the meal. But that's something where I've seen a little bit of clash in the research. And I think it depends on how you're responding to the food itself.
I also wonder if it depends, athletes versus people who are sedentary. Maybe the person who benefited from it, maybe I benefit from it because I don't eat enough throughout the day. So you need food, you can't sleep. And then finally when I have that late night snack, or if it's an athlete, they really need to be getting in those calories, then it's oh, okay, we can sleep now. Versus somebody already eating enough. That just
I think that's a really good theory. I mean, it definitely makes logical sense in my head.
Yeah. So there's just so much variability from person to person. It's going to be really important to see. And my last question, I think we'll wrap it up with this. I do want to ask you other things about your menstrual cycle, cravings. There's lots of things I could ask. Maybe I'll have to get you on for a follow-up podcast. I don't know. But my final question for you, I do have Dr. Neil Barnard's book here of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And this is called Your Body in Balance. He's all about, this is the hormone book that just came out, but his whole thing is reversing diabetes with a plant-based diet around a low-fat plant-based diet. And how and this is surprising to me as a dietitian, and I'm sure to you, because obviously when we combine fat with our carbohydrate, that's going to decrease the glucose spike. But his whole theory is that fat is what gums up the insulin receptor. So when we are decreasing high fat foods like cheeses, animal products, even oils, this can really help promote our insulin sensitivity. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts around this, or if you know any research around this.
Yeah, that is interesting. I haven't read the book. I definitely will, because it's an interesting perspective. I don't know if you've read any of Ted Naiman's work, but he has a similar position, but sort of a different perspective. So he's like a very pro pork protein person. And then he's saying you either need to fill the rest with mostly carbohydrates or mostly fat. And he's saying the combination of the two is where you get into trouble. I don't know if either of them are that simplistic. I think in nature, you know, we had fat and we had carbs, and it was probably more seasonal. There's a lot of research from like Sachin Panda's lab. I don't know if you're aware of any of his research, but he talks about how the microbiome changes seasonally, and we can better digest and handle more carbohydrates in the summer and not as well in the winter. So I think there's maybe more complexity to it. There's certainly a ton of evidence that when you do combine a lot of carbohydrates with a lot of fat, if you're doing both high carb and high fat, that can cause insulin resistance, especially if it's like refined oils, like very stripped of any natural nutrient density, and refined carbohydrates. So think like pizza, fried foods, like things that are like starch and oils. That's certainly a recipe for insulin resistance. So I don't know if I have the answer. I think prioritizing protein is probably like universal across the board. And then I think if you focus on whole foods and appropriate intake, and you're not overloading the system with too much energy, overloading the system with just these massive meals, that it's probably going to be okay whether you're choosing to do a more high carb approach or a low carb approach. I don't know if there's a right answer. I truly believe there's no one right diet, and there's lots of different ways to eat that can be healthy. So I don't know.
Great answer. I actually, something that he mentions in his book is prioritizing protein, and I've definitely felt so much better since incorporating more protein into my personal lifestyle. And since I started weight training, it seems to me that, yeah, having more protein and I'm plant-based, you know, adding tempeh, having these plant-based alternatives definitely helps to have sustained like satisfaction throughout the day. And I feel a lot better. However, yeah, I have not done this continuous glucose monitoring quite yet, but I definitely have to try it. And I'm excited to offer anybody listening, anybody watching this, you can get a discount with my code Vitamin Katie on your continuous glucose monitoring system from Nutrisense. I cannot wait to try it. This is not something that's just for people with diabetes. This is real prevention. And it's about time we took control of our health. I'm so happy. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Just one more thing that maybe you'd like people to know about Nutrisense, or?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest thing, what we're always telling people is like data over dogma. So like know for yourself before you follow something or do something. Like always verify it with real meaningful data. We're all about like, we're not pushing a specific diet or telling you what to do. We're helping you discover what's best for your body. So that's really like our biggest mission and goal. And yeah, you just sign up at the website, nutrisense.io.
Cool. Yes, everybody go nutrisense.io. Is there anywhere else that people can find you? Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else?
Yeah, for sure. So on Nutrisense.io is our Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And especially on Instagram and Twitter, we're putting out like tons of nutrition related information, glucose hacks, other people's screenshots of their data and what they're learning. So if you kind of want to see what other people are learning from their data, you can definitely check out Instagram and Twitter. And we have tons of information coming out there.
Ooh, I'm so excited. Everybody go check it out. Get your continuous glucose monitor. Use my code Vitamin Katie to get a discount. And gosh, yeah, everybody, if you get anything from this, stop drinking your soda and stop eating those fried foods, decrease stress, make sure you're getting good sleep. If anything, start there. And yeah, I'm so excited. Thanks so much, Kara.